And welcome back. My next guest is Susan Branam, the Deputy Director of the Rockland County Veterans Service Agency. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, George. Thank you for having me today.
So, Susan, you've got a very interesting personal story that we'd like to maybe speak about your service as a vet, and also as one of the few at the time helicopter pilots, Apache helicopter pilots in the world, and during your military service. So maybe for the benefit of our viewers, you could give us a little bit about your background. Where do you live, and how did you get into military service?
I'm from Shanksville, Pennsylvania. If you are familiar with the 9/11 plane crash, that's the area that I grew up in. I went to college. I really didn't know how I was going to pay for college, and I showed up, took an ROTC class, and they said, "Are you here for the scholarship?" And I said, "What scholarship? Great." So I got a 3.5-year academic scholarship from the Army. I graduated from University of Pittsburgh with a Bachelor of Science in biology, and I passed a flight physical. So I got a phone call from Fort Rucker saying, you know, "Ma'am, welcome to Fort Rucker." And I said, I guess I'm going to go fly. So it was a surprise for me. So I went to Fort Rucker, went through flight school. It just happened to be that I went in 1993. When I started in 1993 in flight school in June, combat aviation was not open to women. There were no combat slots open to women. Although women have been in combat since the beginning of this country, we were not recognized to do that. So someone asked me through all of my testing what I'd like to fly, and I said, I want to fly an Apache. And they said, "You can't fly that, you're a woman." And I never liked being told what I could or couldn't do. And it just happened to be that a bill was signed that same year that allowed women to go into combat aviation. So when I graduated, I went into the Scout helicopter, which was a combat helicopter, OH-58, and I went into the cavalry in Fort Hood. I was the first woman to go into 6th Cavalry, be a platoon leader. It was a lot of fun. And as soon as I could get a transition into the age 64 Apache, that's what I did. At the time that I was there were 7 other women in the country that were flying, actually 7 other women in the world that were flying Apaches.
Wow. Tell me just how long did you serve in the Army?
I was active duty for 7 years. I did not serve in combat. I did what we called real world missions. Wherever the Army needed us to go, that's what we did.
Right. So what were some of the, if you can talk about it, what were some of the places that you were stationed or places that you flew?
I was stationed in, of course, Fort Rucker, which is the home of Army Aviation. I was stationed in Fort Hood. From Fort Hood, I traveled all over the United States. We did a lot of missions with joint task forces with the Border Patrol. We were looking for drugs coming into the country. We did naval operations. I landed on ships. We deployed over oceans. Did a lot of fun things there. I served in South Korea. I was at Camp Humphreys for a year, patrolled the DMZ. I came back to Fort Rucker for more training.
What was it like patrolling the border and the DMZ? I mean, those are two fairly interesting assignments. So what would that typically be like? I mean, when you're patrolling the border, was the Army also working in conjunction with the DEA and things like that?
There was, the Joint Task Force means there were several organizations. We were used as surveillance, and we aided the Border Patrol and the DEA. A lot of times I was sitting in a Border Patrol office, really being a communication key between the Army and the Border Patrol, because we don't speak the same language, we don't have the same frequencies, and so a lot of times that's what I did as an officer. And along the DMZ, I mean, it's they never declared peace in Korea. And there's still a lot of hostility. There's it's a real threat, and there are soldiers that die every year there, and unfortunately, I don't see an end coming anytime soon.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, with the DMZ, I mean, there was just even recently, as a month before the taping of this program, there was an incident there with some shooting across the border and what have you. So there's a lack of peace there, so extra vigilance is required. So what did you do after Korea?
I came back to the United States. I came back to Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, but at that point I had broken my foot. and I was no longer able to fly, and I went through about 1.5 to 2 years of surgeries and trying to get me back up, but at that point I was medically discharged. And so I stayed in the Savannah area. I finished my psychology degree, my master's in psychology at that point.
And now, how did you end up in the Rockland County Veteran Service Agency?
I think by luck. I got married and I moved here. I'm since divorced, but and I had 3 children. And I started working at RCC as an adjunct professor. I knew that I wanted to come back into the workforce, and I had filed a claim. When I got out of the service, I had a lot of injuries. And so I was given a percentage, and I thought I was lucky. You know, thank goodness I got out, and I'm doing all right. Jerry Dinellen told me that I should have a higher percentage, and I said, crazy. No, I don't think so. So I started working with Jerry, and he helped me to do more paperwork, and I started asking all kinds of questions and kind of drove him crazy. Why does the VA do this? What does this mean? And how do you do this? And I think that I asked enough questions that when there was a job opening, he called and said, "Would you like to work here?" And I said, "I sure would." So it just worked out.
And how long have you been in the Rockland Veteran Service Agency?
I've been there for 3 years now.
3 years, okay. And maybe for the benefit of our viewers, I know Jerry's been a guest, and we have a vet pretty much in every one of these shows.
Oh, good.
And almost all the vets will talk about their interaction with either Jerry or yourself or with that office. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about an overview of the agency, what it does, and maybe some of the things that are new.
Well, what we do is Jerry and I are veterans, and we help veterans. So anything that they have issues with, if they're looking to use their GI Bill or go back to school, if they have a claim that they've already filed with the VA, or maybe they've never realized they had something that they could file. So we help with paperwork. People are looking for VA loans. If you know a veteran that is having problems with PTSD, we point them to services. So really anything that a veteran in the county needs assistance with, we try to either help them with it or get them where they can get that help.
And maybe, again, just for the benefit of our viewers, some of the things that specifically that you're involved with in the Veteran Service Agency. It's not just limited to our newer vets, but frankly, it's vets of all ages, correct?
It is. I see probably about 30 to 35 veterans every week, and I'd say about half of those veterans are Vietnam-era veterans. A lot of those veterans, they came back from their service, and they knew that they needed to keep quiet and to blend in. And they never asked for anything, and they never signed up for services, and they just had to keep to themselves. And so a lot of those veterans now are retiring, and they're starting to realize that they may have a hearing loss. They may have PTSD. Maybe they never signed up to go into the VA medical system. And those are about half of the veterans I see now are from Vietnam era.
And again, it's really, I think that's a critical group of vets that are now coming into retirement age. One of the things that we're kind of aware of is that PTSD, there's some real issues with PTSD, obviously with our vets, but in very many cases it can be bottled up, and as people go through life changes, retirement in particular, things can really kind of unfold. What are some of the services that are out there for vets that are experiencing PTSD?
Well, we have a VA clinic that provides medical care in the county, and they do have psychiatrists and psychologists that are available if you're in the VA medical system. There's also there's a peer-to-peer program run by Bridges. There's also veterans organizations in the county that can help with things. So there is some support. I think the hardest thing is getting people to recognize what PTSD is, and then to admit that they have it, and admit that they may need a hand.
And what should somebody, watching this program, maybe they have a vet in their family, or they themselves are a vet, what's the first thing that they need to do if someone around them is experiencing PTSD, or there are some concerns with a life change that might bring on some remembrances that might exhibit PTSD?
Well, I think the best thing you can do is have a knowledge of what it is, because for veterans, it's very hard for us to admit that we have a problem and then to admit that we need help. So, I think the biggest thing is education. So there's some VA websites. One is called About Face, and it has stories of veterans. You can just go to the www.va.gov. They have information about what PTSD is, what symptoms are, what that might look like for different people. And I think if you can help the veteran to realize what's going on without them thinking they're crazy, because it's not a crazy, it's a normal reaction to a trauma.
Well, Susan, I want to thank you for being such a wonderful guest, and I want to thank you, of course, for your service to our country and your service to our vets here in Rockland County at the Veterans Service Agency.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And again, I'd like to have you just offer your contact information if a vet wants to get in touch with you or the Veterans Service Agency. How would they do that?
Well, we're located at 20 Squadron on the 4th floor, Suite 480 in New City, or they can call 845-638-5244.
Great. Again, Susan, thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us as a wonderful guest.
Thank you.
Coming up next, Clarkstown Town Justice, Judge Scott Ugel.